Good day, friends. Former Army Chief General Naravane's unpublished memoirs, which have rocked the parliament, are the symptom of a much deeper malaise that has afflicted India's national security and made it ineffectual since the coming of the Modi government in 2014. And this deeper malaise is about three military terminologies with very clear definitions that have got totally mixed up. And these three military terminologies are chain of command, operational control or operational responsibility, and deterrence. Now, and this is at the heart of the whole problem that the book is not getting published and that the government benches did not allow discussion on the unpublished memoirs of General Naravane in the parliament. So let me explain this in the light of these three terminologies, which are absolutely sacrosanct to any professional military. The first one is chain of command. Now, chain of command is what military is all about. In simple terms, a soldier or an officer, he gets the command, he gets the orders from his immediate superior to which he gives the feedback also. And that is it. Nothing more than that. Talking in our context, just picking an example, that the Chief of Defense Staff in India, who is not in the chain of command, is not supposed to, should not give direct orders to, let's say, an army commander, and the army commander should not accept those orders because it is outside the chain of command. The chain of command of the army commander is the army chief. So it should never happen. Now, once we understand the importance of the chain of command, because this is what the military discipline and the deliverance is all about, I will now talk of one instance which is there in the unpublished memoir, which is at the heart of the Galwan crisis, the Galwan killing, which has been the turning point in India-China's relations. So this happened on the second week of May when there was a brigade commanders meeting at Galwan, a disputed place. And after the longish meeting, the PLA commander, he put in a very unusual request asking the Indian side that the PLA would want to put two tents temporarily at that place in Galwan, to which the Indian side said, we'll have to check it with our superior. And the meeting was over. But the PLA same night came back and pitched those two tents on the place. Now, when this instance was brought to the notice of the Army Chief General Naravane, he was anxious and uneasy about it, and he shared it with his Northern Army commander, Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi. Naravane told him that, look, this is the usual creep tactics of the PLA. What they do is they leave a telltale sign, in this case the tent, and after some time they'll come and say that this territory belongs to us. But instead of understanding and allaying and assuaging the apprehensions and the anxiety of his chief, Joshi instead gave two reasons why this will not happen. First, he said that that is the Indian Army can always get those tents vacated whenever it wants. And second, he said that in the summer months when there is flooding in the Galwan river, these tents cannot stay there. It is untenable then. But the apprehension remained of Naravane, and Naravane was proved right. By the month of June, when the two sides were meeting for different things, the PLA stopped even referring to those tents. When the attention was brought to the temporary tents, the PLA told the Indian side that the tents were outside the preview of the talks. Then, on the 15th of June 2020, India decided to pitch own tents in the same area. And this was unacceptable to the PLA. So they were aggressive and reinforcements were brought in by both the sides. On the Indian side, the reinforcement was led by the commanding officer, Colonel Santosh Babu. And on the PLA side, they were far better placed because of the connectivity. And therefore, they could bring the PLA in large numbers in APC, which is the Armored Personnel Carrier. Because the Indian side got outnumbered, it took far more casualties. The number was 20 killed on the Indian side. The rest details are known to the people. I won't go in the details here. But the point to make is that Santosh Babu was killed, the commanding officer. He got the Mahavir Chakra, and in his citation, it was written that he executed the task successfully. Now, the task really was to put the tents there, which I don't think was done. And in the unpublished memoir of Naravane, I think Naravane wrote a balanced account where he said that Santosh Babu's job was to diffuse the situation, which is what it was. Now, I met General Naravane after the Galwan killings in 2020 in his office in South Block. This is the last time that I spoke or I met with General Naravane. In fact, this is the last time that I ever went to the South Block. And during the course of my interaction with the chief, General Naravane, I asked him two pointed questions. I said, look, a lot of talk and rumors are floating that perhaps CDS General Bipin Rawat, he conveyed some orders directly to either the army commander or to somebody else, which is why the Indian side tried to pitch the tents there on the 15th of June. To which he replied that he was not aware of any such thing, but he refused to say how the tents came there. Of course, he said that he was not aware of the whole thing. Then, other thing I asked him is that if the Indian side, the soldiers, they were actually carrying their self-defense weapons, they had their rifles, and they were outnumbered. Why is it they didn't use it? To which he said that yes, they had the rifles, they had the self-defense weapon, but refused to answer the second part of my questions why they were not used. So the point that I'm making is very simple, that somebody had bypassed the chain of command, and this is at the heart of the Galwan problem. So somebody bypassed the chain of command, which is sacrosanct, should not have happened in a professional military. Now, the second terminology which is very important is operational control or operational responsibility. It should be said very clearly that it is all very clear until it was clear until the coming of the Modi government. As far as the political leadership is concerned, their job is to tell the military what are the political objectives, why the force needs to be used to achieve those political objectives. And their job finishes there. Then it is the military leadership that takes on, which is the operational responsibility or the operational control to decide how and when, in what time frame, with what capabilities the job is to be accomplished, and keep apprising the political leadership of the progress. So there's a clear division between what the political leadership is supposed to do and what the military leadership is supposed to do. Now, this changed with the coming of Prime Minister Modi, because he, in his first combined commanders conference that he addressed in October 2014, he gave out an operational directive, something that no Prime Minister before him has ever done. And the directive, operational directive, meant for Pakistan was coming from the Prime Minister that while the threat is known, that means it is Pakistan, the enemy may be invisible, which is terrorist. In other words, the Prime Minister officially sanctioned counter-terror operations as the task of the military. Not only that, we saw that the Prime Minister was also involved in the operational matters. For example, in Balakot, that happened in 2019, we heard the Prime Minister say that he told the military leadership that we can get the benefit of the clout. Then, when the Indian Air Force did the Balakot airstrike, the next day the Pakistan Air Force it paid back with its own operation called Operation Swift Retort. And at the end of the second day, the Indian Air Force conceded that what the Pakistan Air Force did was an act of war, but nothing was done by the Indian side because it was a clear operational directive that it was only about counter-terror operations. Nothing more is to be done. Similarly, we saw in Operation Sindoor, the name itself of the operation was given by the Prime Minister, which is absolutely unprecedented. Since independence, no Prime Minister has done that. And then asking for a ceasefire after having initiated the operation from the Pakistan side is something only a political leadership can do. No professional military or a person who understands warfare will ever do that. Because he will know that if you breach the sovereignty of Pakistan, a retaliation will come before they agree to a ceasefire. So the point that I am making is that what has happened with the coming of the Prime Minister is that while he controls the strategic level of war, which is that higher level, which is to delegate and say why the military force is to be used, he is also in control of the operational level. The operational buck stops at the Prime Minister and not the service chief. And why it stops at the Prime Minister is because what he says, his orders, they take precedence over the orders of the chief. But the big difference is that a Prime Minister's role as an operational commander is not formalized. Something that the PLA has done of President Xi Jinping. For example, China, which is our biggest concern or biggest military threat, what has happened is that after the 2015 military reforms, Xi Jinping has now assumed the role of the commander-in-chief since 2016. So Xi Jinping now has 4 hats that he wears. He is the general secretary of the party, he is the president of China, he is the head of the Central Military Commission, and he is also the commander-in-chief. Which means that during war, now he sits, if there is a hot war, there is a joint operational command center under the Joint Start Department, which is where he will be sitting in the case of hot war. And take it for granted that in case of gray zone operations, or what we call the hybrid operations, which go on the line of actual control, there is nothing that happens there which is not in the knowledge of Commander-in-Chief Xi Jinping. Now I come to my third point, which is deterrence. Now, deterrence has 2 very clear components. One is the military capabilities, which is supposed to deter your adversary or the enemy. And the bigger component than this, what I have always believed in, is the political will to fight. This is far too important, very important, because we've seen this in Afghanistan, where 2 superpowers, they lost. And we saw this in Vietnam, where a superpower lost. So the will to fight is important, and perhaps more important than the military capabilities to deter an enemy. And we saw that the will to fight has not been there since 2014, 2017, Doklam happened. In the Doklam, the government was so anxious to end the operation that it should not escalate, that all 13 rounds of talks for the de-escalation, they happened in Beijing, none in Delhi. Then we are aware it is India that reached out to China for the Wuhan informal summit, which was held in 2018 between Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping, and back to back within a month. Prime Minister Modi also had another informal summit in Sochi with President Putin, because Putin was supposed to be the guarantor of peace between India and China. Balakot, I have already explained that how the Prime Minister was in charge, and we did not fight even when the Indian Air Force said what the Pakistan Air Force did was an act of war. Then we saw in the Galwan killings, which I said is the turning point between India and China. The unpublished memoirs of Naravane say that on 17th of June 2020, Jay Shankar, he spoke with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. He does not say what transpired between the two, but what we know is that on the 19th of June 2020, India did the unthinkable for the Chinese. They could not have asked for anything more. Prime Minister himself publicly declared that no Chinese or nobody is sitting on our territory and nobody came in our territory. In other words, all the talk that the MEA was making that Indian army does not cross the line of actual control, and the external affairs was minister was talking to the other side. Now it was very clear to the Chinese that the prime minister had accepted the 1959 claim line of the PLA. Now, when you see in the light of these three terminologies, which I said is about operational preparedness, then you see the main event which has been put out in this unpublished memoir. It is this, that on the 31st of August night at 8:30, the army commander, Northern Army Commander Joshi, he got information that for Chinese tanks along with infantry, they were moving towards Rachingla. Now, Rachingla is on that Kailash range south bank of Pangong So, which had been occupied the previous night by our brave soldiers. So the tanks were moving and they were within a few hundred meters, according to this narrative or the unpublished memoirs of the chief, Naravane. So starting from 8:30 until 10:30, Naravane made frantic calls to everybody in the establishment, in the security establishment of India, which included Defense Minister Rajnath Singh, NSA Doval, CDS General Bipin Rawat, and External Affairs Minister Jay Shankar, asking them, what are my orders? What am I supposed to do? The tanks are coming up. Because there was a very clear thing told, notification was there that you cannot open fire without clearance from the top. And what is the top? Top is what I said, that the operational buck stops at the Prime Minister. So the orders had to come from the Prime Minister. So the ideal thing should have been that the Prime Minister should have explained either this restriction that had been put on Naravane should not have been put, given the situation was fluid, it was evolving, or the Prime Minister immediately should have told Naravane what is to be done, that the tanks were coming, the situation was grave, there could have been an escalation, there could have been a war. But nothing happened until 10:30, and finally, Defense Minister, he replied to Naravane, and this is what the memoir said, that he was relaying the message of the Prime Minister, "Jo uchit samjho wo karo." In other words, the orders were given from the Prime Minister without taking the responsibility. This has been interpreted by the people, so many veterans, as saying that what the Prime Minister said was basically giving a free hand to the army chief. Well, free hand to the army chief or any service chief is not this. Free hand would be if they are in total operational control or they have operational responsibility, with no interference from the political side, something that we saw in the 1971 war where the results were delivered, where the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi gave very clear political directions to the Army Chief General Sam Manekshaw, who then was in total operational control. His job was to come and tell every morning the Prime Minister what had happened. He was not to talk to the Defense Minister or anybody. He straightaway would come to the Prime Minister and give the feedback to the Prime Minister, because the chain of command does not work. Let me underline this, between the top military leadership when he is communicating with the Prime Minister or the highest person in the government. So, when the present situation, now what does it tell us? It tells us that if the chain of command can be bypassed through a chosen officer, that means the army has got politicized. And the other thing that it tells the adversaries or the enemy is that if there is not very clearly defined operational control or operational responsibility, that military cannot deliver. So this is really the problem. The problem is much more than the unpublished memoir of Naravane. Thank you. Why why